right, good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. This is the Rotary Club of Toronto. I am John Fortney, your club president, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Rotary meeting for today. After the invocation and the recognition of the traditional lands, please stay tuned for the playing of the national anthem and the loyal toast. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples who have walked and cared for this land for 15,000 years. They include the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Treaty Peoples of the Mississaugas of the Credit. It is with honor and admiration that we remember those who, through their commitment to duty, have shaped the world of today. We enjoy freedom and liberty. We enjoy the privilege as a club to positively affect the lives of the disadvantaged. All of this is predicated upon the spirit, actions, and sacrifices of those who set the course for us to follow. May we have the spirit, the strength, and dedication to build upon the foundations we have inherited. Thank you. No national anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, the Queen. Returning guests, it's now my pleasure to introduce our head table. I'm pleased to have the following people with me today. Robert Bob Smith, a Rotarian since 1978. That's 43 years. He is retired, past club president, and foundation president. He will be our Let's Be personal speaker for today. Bill MP, a Rotarian since 1991. That's 30 years. His classification, consultant economist. He is founding partner at Prism Economics and Analysis, and he is host to our guest speaker today, who is the Honourable Roy Cullen, who will be more formally introduced shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, Roy Cullen. I do want to thank Alan Ely, who was entertained us before the meeting, the YouTube meeting, and as people joined on, I really appreciate that, and I think everyone enjoyed it. And I also want to thank Brigitte and Glenn for doing the national anthem on video for us. For our virtual meetings, we do not have an official monitor to introduce the visiting Rotarians and guests, so I will do it. To our visiting Rotarians, thank you for choosing our club for your makeup. We hope that you enjoy the meeting. To all of our guests, welcome to our virtual meeting today. Please feel free to contact the office and find out how you may be able to make a difference by joining us. Rotarians, please welcome our visitors in the tradition of our great club. Our announcements, this one you hear every week. You may already know this, but in case you do not, you should be aware that these virtual Rotary meetings, that if you have your video camera on, that you may show up on the YouTube or Google Meet recordings or the live streaming. We ask that when you have your camera on, that you present a professional image, have your lunch earlier, please, and we are aware of what is going on in the background when your camera is on. If you don't want to appear, please turn your video off. We will not be able to edit you out later. Thank you. I'd like now to call upon Kurt Crozen, our District Liaison Director. Kurt has a district announcement to share with you all. Over to you, Kurt. You're on mute, Kurt. Sorry.
My apologies. Thank you. Thank you, President John. Next Thursday, April 22nd, 2021 is Earth Day. On Wednesday, April the 21st, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, leading up to Earth Day and the Rotary Great Lakes Watershed Cleanup, Rotary District 7070 here in Southern Ontario, Canada, will be holding an Earth Day 2021 virtual celebration. This is open to all Rotarians and guests everywhere. Come and hear about the importance of the Great Lakes. Mark Fisher, CEO Council of the Great Lakes, will discuss the importance of the health and vitality of the Great Lakes to Ontario and neighboring states and the multi-jurisdictional cooperation in managing this shared resource. And come and hear Sam Dema of Pick Waste, an entrepreneur and youth coach. Sam has a compelling and inspirational story to share that has been delivered in several TED Talks. He started Pick Waste, a community cleanup initiative which has attracted widespread attention. Also, our own club's Environment Services Committee is planning to participate in the Rotary Great Lakes Watershed Cleanup. Although COVID restrictions has made it impossible to hold this event on April 24th, as originally intended, we do plan on conducting an event likely in late May. Your participation in the planned walk-up cleanup event will be most welcome. Please stay tuned for details on how to join. You will find the link to the Earth Day 2121 virtual celebration in this week's Voice. I have signed up. Hope to see you there. Thank you for your time. Back to you, President John.
Thank you, Kurt. I'm so glad that our club and our environmental committee has taken on the challenge of a Earth Day, but this Great Lakes cleanup is going to be quite amazing. Every district along the Great Lakes in Canada and the United States is doing something. It's literally thousands of Rotarians and friends working to help clean up the Great Lakes. It's an amazing. So please, like Kurt asked, check into it and sign up. And unfortunately, it's canceled for the 24th, but it will be later in May. Thank you, Kurt. Donna Jones Simmons is next with a short announcement. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you, President John. As a member of the Diversity Committee, I'd like to share a message or my diversity statement to you. The Rotary Club of Toronto believes that every human being deserves a right to equality and freedom from discrimination. We support the notion that every person must be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of the color of their skin, their socioeconomic status, religious belief, age, and sexual orientation. Thank you. Over to you, President John.
Thank you, Donna. Very important message. And now it's our time for our Let's Be Personal speaker. And it's my pleasure to pass the agenda over to Bob Smith. Over to you, Bob.
Unmute, Bob.
Sorry about that.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. For the many of you who do not know me or have forgotten that you did, I started life on a family farm in rural Ontario. I began my formal education in a red brick schoolhouse with one teacher instructing 8 grades, with the student body varying between 25 and 30, dependent on the year and the state of the crops. I like to think that I never stopped learning, but formally I studied economics at York University and I completed the Canadian Securities course. Occupationally, I spent 2 years working with the Bank of Montreal, starting in London, Ontario, then transferring to Toronto. But the move with my small town mind was cause for me to change careers. Surprisingly, I didn't leave the city, but I went to work at a company quaintly named the Trustees of the Toronto General Burying Grounds, now known as the Mount Pleasant Group. I was, however, challenged and stayed for 30 years, the last 20 of which I was president, chief executive officer, and a director of the corporation. While there, we expanded the business geographically to include a number of new facilities, offerings of memorial products and other related services, and created a funeral business named The Simple Alternative. I then spent several years advising companies in the industry and traveled fairly extensively to do so. My first contact with Rotary was actually in 1962, when I was chosen to represent the Rotary Club of London West at a week camp held on the eastern shore of Lake Huron, sponsored by the Rotary clubs throughout Western Ontario and Michigan, and was entitled Seminar for Tomorrow's Leaders. And I remember it for a number of reasons, but most importantly, that I just experienced one of the most effective learning events that I'd ever been at. I found after I joined the Rotary Club of Toronto that we offered a similar experience. This course was many years later, but it was our Camp Enterprise program. I joined the Rotary Club of Toronto Forest Hill in 1976, when I remained for 2 years and was very active in work with crippled children. I had to leave, and I accepted an invitation to join the Rotary Club of Toronto. So this actually makes it my 45th year, I think, in Rotary. Needless to say, I found the Toronto Club somewhat more intimidating when walking into the meeting room. There were 10 times as many attendees. In the early going, the first major icebreaker for me was being recruited by our member, John Sprague, who many of you will remember. John recruited me to attend the Blue Mountain Camp. He wanted me to travel up with he and Del Rakoff. I didn't realize leaving that we would stop at every town pub on the way, but in any event, that was when I really became acclimatized to the Rotary Club of Toronto. A little sidebar to this is that the camp idea, according to the story told to me, was that a member of our club who owned the Canada Steamship Lines took crippled children on the ships in the summer up to the lake. It'd take about a week to do it, I guess. And he then was inspired to acquire the land at Blue Mountain and create the Blue Mountain Camp in concert with the Crippled Children's Society. And I went to that camp every year until it was sold. So I went through my notes preparing for this. I was overwhelmed with so many highlights and memories. I realized it was impossible for me to do justice to this presentation. When I joined, the club was in the midst of raising $7.5 million to build a Rotary Club of Toronto Lachlan Lodge, a huge senior citizens residence in downtown Toronto, and it was reputed to be the largest project by a single Rotary Club in the world at that time. In short, I've served on countless committees, special task forces, and so on over the years, some more successful than others. I'll only refer to one such activity, and that was serving on the Strategic Planning Committee in Alan Martin's year. From that, one initiative was defining a process to use in seeking out signature projects from time to time. The first time we used that process was in my year as president, and that's when I was pleased to announce the club's signature project would be the health bus, which, as you all know, I'm sure, still continues to provide the valuable services in downtown Toronto. I had the the privilege of serving as club president in 1994. I served on the Rotary Club of Toronto Charitable Foundation for about 12 or 13 years, 3 of which I served as president. Thank you, John, for your indulgence. I enjoyed the day.
Well, thank you, Bob. Again, every week, I really hope that we have people signed up every week, because I just love hearing the stories about people, their careers, where they've come from, and then the Rotary stories. Bob, those are gold. I didn't know about this kind of steamship taking kids up to Lakehead. I think that is absolutely brilliant. I knew about Lachlan Center being the largest thing done by any Rotary Club anywhere. But these stories need to be told and retold, because it's really important and it's our history. And as a club, we should be so proud. And we need people like you to keep telling us these are amazing, amazing stories. And we need to remember these stories so we can tell other people when they join. Anyways, thank you again, Bob. Any members that want to get on the list of Let's Be Personal, please contact Don Bell. Now, time for our guest speaker introduction. Bill MP, over to you.
Thank you, President John. I'm very, very happy to introduce our speaker today, Roy Cullen. Roy is going to be offering us some startling and at times sobering insights into money laundering in British Columbia and Canada and around the world. Roy's a friend of Rotary in general, and in fact, he's made presentations on money laundering to several other clubs, but he's a past member and a friend to our club. Roy and his wife, Ethne, live in Victoria, where they're keeping busy with their retirement. Roy and Ethne are both published authors with 5 books between them. And we're talking about some serious writing here. Roy's just finished his first novel. His second book describes his reflections on the real life of being a parliamentarian in Ottawa. Roy's writing on corruption and money laundering has won international awards. But I want in particular to recognize the integrity and the depth of Roy's public work. He's made a huge commitment and contribution to honesty and quality in government in Canada and around the world. Roy was first elected to the House of Commons in 1996, and he served as a member for Etobicoke North until 2008. As a member of Jean Chrétien's government and then Paul Martin's, he served as the chair of the Commons Standing Committee on Finance, parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance, to the Deputy Prime Minister, and the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. In 2008, he published his first book, The Poverty of Corrupt Nations. And this was just one part of his growing role in a global campaign against corruption and money laundering. During his tenure as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance, Roy was actively involved in designing and implementing Canada's anti-money laundering regime. Roy's been active for many years with the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. He's played a leadership role in several anti-corruption and anti-money laundering conferences and workshops, and Roy brings us his insights today. Over to you, Roy.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And it's so great to be back with fellow Rotarians from Toronto, virtually, of course, now, but it's great to be back. And thank you so much, Bill, we have maintained contact over many years, and it's great to be back with all of you. I'll just get to the next slide, please. So I'm happy to speak about money laundering. I'm always careful to say this is about how to defeat it, not how to do it. But having said that, you need to know a bit about how to do it before you can figure out how to get rid of it. I'd like to take you back first to the year 2000, the Y2K we'll all remember, I'm sure. And that was the year that Canada legislated its anti-money laundering regime through the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act. I had the pleasure of shepherding that legislation through the House of Commons and the Senate Committee. And we were the last G7 country to bring in an anti-money laundering regime But as you may recall, in the mid-1990s, Canada's government was quite focused on our fiscal challenges. But having said that, being the last G7 country to bring in this legislation gave us an opportunity to draw on the expertise and experience of those countries that had already enacted such legislation. And so the House of Commons Standing Committee brought in experts from around the world. The Department of Finance did a lot of consultation, and the government designed what we felt at the time was the good governance model for the FINTRAC, which is the Financial Intelligence Unit that was created as a result of this legislation. FINTRAC stands for the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada, and they're the people that collect the financial information and identify potential money laundering leads. So we did the benchmarking, we looked at best practices, and we felt that FINTRAC had a good mandate, it was properly resourced, and I had the pleasure in years subsequent to be part of meetings of the Egmont Group. Now, the Egmont Group represents about 85% of the financial intelligence units around the world. And in fact, its secretariat was until recently in Toronto. It's now just recently moved to Ottawa. But I know from those meetings that Canada had a very good reputation for its the anti-money laundering regime and the legislation. However, in 2015, Canadians, British Columbians and Canadians might have made the media there as well in Toronto, were shocked with these images on television of gamblers arriving at casinos in British Columbia with duffel bags filled with $20 bills wrapped in elastic bands, and then being escorted to the VIP lounge and to do their gambling. And so really what it represented, I'm not going to get into all the details of the casinos, because that, to me, the casinos is sort of the thin edge of the wedge. And I would only say that I'm sure in Ontario, you have problems with money laundering in your casinos, but it couldn't be any worse than it is or was in British Columbia. The government is acting on the casinos. They brought in Dr. Peter German, a retired deputy commissioner of the RCMP. He did an extensive review, came up with 48 recommendations, and the government is essentially acting on them. It was sort of like how not to set up the governance around casino gambling. I should go back briefly to the year 2016. And in that year, the Financial Action Task Force, now the Financial Action Task Force is the international standard setter with respect to the fight against money laundering. It grew out of the G7. And they did a review in 2016 of Canada's anti-money laundering regime. And generally, they were quite positive. It wasn't a glowing report, but it was pretty decent. But one glaring loophole they saw in Canada's money laundering regime was the fact that lawyers were not reporting suspicious transactions. Now, going back to the year 2000, the government included lawyers on the list of what we call reporting entities, those entities required to report suspicious transactions to FINTRAC, the Financial Intelligence Unit. Lawyers were included then, but this was challenged by the legal profession in Canada. And in 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada rendered a decision that lawyers, on the basis of solicitor-client privilege, were not required to report suspicious transactions. So this is a gaping weakness in our regime. And one of the recommendations I've been pushing is for Canada to find a way. And there are some models in the UK, for example, that I think Canada could draw from and still meet constitutional and charter requirements. Because of these problems and the report of Dr. German, the BC government, through the Attorney General, David Eby, decided to set up a public inquiry into money laundering, and it's the Cullen Commission. By the way, I appeared in front of the Cullen Commission. One of the first things I said was that, to my knowledge, we weren't related, and he laughed and said that was his understanding as well. But his mandate is to look at all aspects of money laundering and to report. He released an interim report recently in the last few months. He was meant to report by May this year, but because of the pandemic and some of the challenges, he's been given now to the end of this calendar year. Next slide, please. So where's all this dirty money coming from, and how is it laundered? Well, unfortunately, we have our list of usual suspects. drug dealers, transnational crime, kleptocrats, human trafficking people, and all sorts of other criminal activities. But we also have another dimension, and that has to do with the geopolitics between Asia, let's say particularly China, the People's Republic, and Hong Kong, and the physical proximity to British Columbia, and some of the cultural ties as well. And just a couple of metrics on that. It's estimated that by the year 2036, 20.8% of the people in Vancouver will be of Chinese descent. Another metric, foreign direct investment from the People's Republic to Canada grew on average 19% annually from 2007 to 2017. Now, the source of that money has changed somewhat over the years. Originally, a lot of it from Hong Kong, then mostly from the People's Republic, and now more recently, because of the security situation and some of the instabilities in Hong Kong, more money now flowing in from Hong Kong, but still a steady flow from the People's Republic. There's a professor in Australia, John Langdale, who regrettably came up with the caption, the Vancouver model of money laundering. Not a sort of label we'd all aspire to, but basically, without getting into any details, it's these exchange people that help Chinese nationals circumvent the exchange control laws in the communist China, and their exchange control laws are quite rigid. They help them get the money into Vancouver, and through various mechanisms, they launder it through casinos, through real estate, and through companies and trusts. And what we had in the casinos, for example, was we had a bias right from the staff, right at the front end, right up to the most senior levels of government. The bias being that, well, it could be clean money. So you have people arriving with these duffel bags, $3 to $4 million in $20 bills, and it could be clean money. And that sort of attitude permeated the whole system right up to the most senior levels, as I said. There was a lack of regulatory scrutiny or monitoring. There was confusion about the role of the two major players in this. One is the BC Lottery Corporation, and they have the exclusive responsibility for the conduct and management of gaming, including casinos, on behalf of the province. It's a crown corporation, and in fiscal 2018-19, the corporation generated a net income of $1.4 billion for the province. The other key player in all this is the Gaming Policy and Enforcement Branch of the BC government. They regulate all gaming operations, including all gaming conducted, managed, and operated by the BC Lottery Corporation. And they have a specific mandate to ensure the overall integrity of gaming. So this lack of clarity between the roles and responsibilities, this bias to say that probably the money could be clean, led to a very weak system to check the wherewithal of these people coming in with this money, know your customer, the due diligence that was required. And so Peter German came up with 48 recommendations, and the government has committed to implementing them all. It's going to take resources, it's going to take time, but I think cleaning up the casinos will be relatively straightforward. Next slide, please. When we come into the real estate sector, it gets a little more complicated, I think, because this is where most of the money is being laundered. Madame Maureen Maloney, who was engaged by the province of BC to look at how dirty money was permeating the real estate sector in BC, in her report, she estimates that 72% of the money laundered in British Columbia is through the BC real estate sector. And this is consistent with earlier studies that were done of RCMP cases, that the vast majority of money laundered in Canada is through real estate. So we have in the real estate sector, in 2018, it was estimated that $5 billion was laundered through the real estate sector in British Columbia. So we have real estate agents. Of course, you have this situation where it's an inherent conflict of interest, if you like, and the same goes with financial intermediaries. Someone's coming in waving $5 million at you, or in the case of a bank transaction, maybe multiple millions, and you have to get to know the customer. Where are you coming from? Where's this money coming from? And you have to do the due diligence. So it's sort of counter intuitive to pursue that vigorously. But in any case, I think that in the real estate sector, it seems that the real estate agents found ways to get around some of the rules. But having said all that, of course, the dirty money people, when they saw that the rules were kind of lax, or the enforcement was lax in British Columbia, it created a sort of an extra push, and the money launderers go where the controls are weakest. Having said all that, the BC government announced its intention to create a new regulator for BC's real estate sector by 2021. And that'll be an independent regulator, and that's important as well. And the Real Estate Council of British Columbia is launching a mandatory and anti-money laundering course for BC real estate agents and property managers. And these are both needed and essential steps. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the institutions that is needed is a registry of beneficial ownership, and different jurisdictions in the world, and indeed Canada is looking to move in that direction. British Columbia has launched a beneficial ownership registry for real estate, and has indicated that they're going to bring in something for companies and trusts as well. Now, this is an essential part of the equation to deal with money launderers, because when we get into the larger amounts, they go to quite extraordinary levels, setting up shell companies, sometimes layered, 3 or 4 or 5 different companies with nominee directors, nominee shareholders. So even those intermediaries that are committed to knowing the customer and to doing the due diligence, it sometimes can be an awesome challenge to go through all these layers. And sometimes these corporations and companies are set up offshore as well. So my colleagues and myself have been pushing for more beneficial ownership registries, so that these will indicate who are the real beneficial owners of real estate or companies and trusts. Now, to do that properly, though, you need to have the due diligence, and you need to have accountabilities. And ideally as well, it should be a public registry. But in Canada, because of our concerns around privacy, there's a bit of a pushback there. So in British Columbia, it is not a publicly available beneficial ownership registry, but it is available to enforcement agencies, etc. But without the due diligence, the proper due diligence, and without the public transparency, you can run into some problems. And in fact, the United Kingdom, to their credit, in 2016, they set up a public registry to deal with some of the dirty money that was coming in from Europe, the Balkans, Asia, all over the place into the city in London. So they set up this. That one is a publicly available beneficial ownership registry. But in 2018, an NGO, non-governmental organization called Global Witness, who I've worked with over the years, they conducted a review and came up with a report that indicated that thousands of UK companies were filing highly suspicious entries or not complying with the rules at all. For example, a beneficial ownership being an infant, or a declaration that there's no beneficial owner. Now, give me a break with that. So that the point that we've been making is that you need to have ideally a public beneficial ownership registry, but in addition, you need the due diligence, and you need to have the accountability. So in other words, if someone makes a declaration of a beneficial owner and is found through the due diligence that that's a false declaration, there have to be consequences, in my judgment, and the judgment of my colleagues that work on this situation as well. Next slide, please. So what are the costs and impacts? Well, there's a number of layers to this. First of all, just the general non-measurable aspect of the corrupting influence on society. It facilitates criminal activity. The whole idea of an anti-money laundering regime is to act as a deterrent against criminal activity. It also impacts citizens. When they look at government agencies and institutions, there's a lot of cynicism around to start with. And when they look to what's happening with the laundering of dirty money, they start to lose more confidence in public institutions. And so none of that is a positive thing, in my judgment. It's also the money laundering in the real estate sector in British Columbia it's estimated by Ms. Maloney that just the impact of dirty money flowing through real estate in British Columbia has had a 5% lift on real estate values. And that has also consequences, significant consequences for the homeless. And I know certainly here in British Columbia, the homeless situation is a big problem. And I think in Toronto as well. And so it can increase the affordability of housing by about 5%. And that's been confirmed by studies in the United States, major cities. And so that's something that needs to be watched as well. The other aspect, of course, obviously the more serious one is the opioid crisis and the human and fiscal costs. If we look at the year 2020, there were 5,000 opioid overdose cases in Canada, 1,700 deaths in British Columbia, and I believe about 820 overdose deaths in Ontario. And so this is a huge cost, human suffering, human tragedy that is not measurable. But in addition to that, there's a huge fiscal cost associated with that. And just as a proxy for that, the British Columbia government and many of the provinces, including Ontario, have filed suits against 40 pharma firms and distributors of OxyContin to recover public health costs associated with opioid abuse. And for example, now these numbers are overstated, you can be sure, but nonetheless, they give you a sense of the magnitude of what we're talking about in terms of the fiscal impact. The British Columbia is suing for $9.1 billion, and Ontario is suing for $26.1 billion. Next slide, please. So the federal government has some key role to play in the fight against money laundering. As I mentioned before, there's the FINTRAC, the Financial Intelligence Unit. There's the Department of Justice in terms of legislation and regulation. There's the RCMP in terms of enforcement, and the Canada Border Services Agency plays a role as well. Now, there are serious fines for reporting entities that fail to report suspicious transactions. But it seems to me, based on the evidence, that these sanctions aren't stiff enough and that FINTRAC is not doing a really great job of auditing these reporting entities to ensure that they are reporting suspicious transactions. The RCMP also, they have, or they did have, a proceeds of crime unit in Division E in Vancouver. And I'm pretty sure they had one in Division O, that's the RCMP division in Ontario. But I know for sure, and I'm sure it's the same for across Canada, that this proceeds of crime unit in British Columbia was disbanded. And I know also that there were some very good leads provided by FINTRAC to the RCMP in Vancouver, but it's not surprising nothing was done with these solid leads because there was no one there to do it. So one of my recommendations is to reestablish those proceeds of crime units, and also that FINTRAC needs to find a way to do a better job of auditing these reporting entities to ensure that they are reporting suspicious transactions. Next slide, please. Another big problem is the lack of prosecution in British Columbia and indeed across Canada. So from the year 2000 to 2016 in Canada, there were 321 guilty verdicts in money laundering cases, and that's a much lower incidence than the United States and the United Kingdom. Money laundering conviction rate also in Canada is 27%, in the UK it's 50%, and the US it's 85%. There are a number of reasons for this, lack of resources, lack of proper mandates perhaps, but there's also law enforcement would prefer to lay charges on what we call the predicate offense. So in other words, if you have a drug dealer, they'd rather lay a charge on the drug dealing rather than on the laundering of that corrupt money or that dirty money. And it's just, money laundering is a little more complex. It deals with financial matters that are somewhat more complex. And also there may be, in fact, I'm sure that there is a notion out there that you need to have a predicate offense before you can go after money launderers. But the criminal code is clear on that. You do not have to have a predicate offense. You need to prove that the money launderer knew or should have known that the money they were dealing with was dirty money. you need not have a predicate. You need not to have a predicate offense and a conviction there. So what I've recommended here, and what I recommended to the Cullen Commission and others, is that the Attorney General of Canada and Provincial Attorneys General, they should mount some serious training and education programs for federal prosecutors, provincial prosecutors, and also law enforcement to encourage them to lay charges against money launderers and to build the capacity, some of the technical capacity that's needed to do that properly. So next slide, please. I'm not going to talk much about lessons learned. Most of it flows from my recommendations that I've defined here. Just that, you know, continuous improvement applies to this like it does any other system. When you see problems, you need to start acting on them, and quickly. And in my view, casinos are sort of the tip of the iceberg. And we need to understand that it's through companies and trusts and real estate that the big bucks are really dealt with. So I look forward. I thank you for your attention. I look forward to any questions and comments. And now I'm going to turn it back to President John.
Thank you so much, Roy. Being in real estate, I have a couple of questions. My one question, though, first off, do you want me to just do a quick explanation of what money laundering is? Like,
okay, money laundering is an attempt to disguise where the money is coming from and disguise the fact that it's actually from illegitimate or criminal activities. So it's an attempt to take that money, that dirty money that's been obtained through criminal activities or other illicit activities, and trying to disguise it and work it into the normal economy through, you know, financial institutions or through real estate or whatever. So when it comes out the other end, it's now seen as clean money.
okay. The opioid, you're just pointing to that, and that is one big criminal activity that, because they're able to launder their money, the activity is continuing to grow, right?
Right.
Okay. I know in real estate, it's really different. From experience, I can tell you, and we deal in the very high end. Most people coming from other countries, we're not just talking China, they are usually represented by realtors from that same country, and they're the ones that do the due diligence, or ought to. And it's very difficult for realtors to actually, if someone came to me from England and they're going to buy a property, how am I going to check to make sure that the money they are bringing from England is legitimate? Like, how? And you can't just say, well, you're from China, so obviously your money must be, or very likely to be. How can you make these kind of comments? Yeah. It's very difficult to put on realtors this sort of, and we do FinTrack reporting on everybody.
Yeah, I know in the year 2000, when we were bringing in this legislation, the real estate sector really lobbied hard to be excluded from the reporting regime, because it's not a comfortable thing to have to do, and it takes some work and some knowledge to identify who you're actually dealing with. That's why I think the BC government is providing some extra training and for real estate agents. But, you know, I guess it comes down to the basic question, where is this, the question to be asked, where is this money coming from? If it's coming through corporations, to do the best efforts possible to identify the beneficial owner, and also flagging it to FinTrack or the bank that you're dealing with. So it's a question of building some capacity. In fact, many of these financial intermediaries now, like Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, when they were fined many billions of dollars for not having a proper regime, they've hired something like 3,000 people to look at compliance in this area. Look, it's not easy. It's complicated. But for example, coming back to the casino example, someone comes in with $20 bills wrapped in elastic bands. Part of the problem in BC is they didn't have a regulator there. They had a regulator there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So guess when the money launderers appeared? And if a person comes with that kind of money, a good question would be, where's that money coming from, sir or madam? Oh, it's coming from my business. Oh, what's the name of the business? Oh, it's a dry cleaning agency. Oh, where is it located? and just sort of probing and probing a bit till you feel that you have some comfort level. And then, you know, the other thing is to make sure if you have a beneficial ownership registry, to check that out to see where these people are coming from. We had a case in British Columbia. It was in Vancouver. I had a reporter on to me about it. It was a multi-million-dollar real estate development in Vancouver. It was commercial, retail, residential. And the person, it was a Chinese national. And when he did this, he was on the Interpol, the red notice list. So, you know, that's an absurd example, I suppose, but it just tells you, obviously, there wasn't a lot of due diligence there.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, especially now with all the anti-Asian problems happening, if you target people, it looks like you are, you could be really, it's a very, very fine line. And we, in our case, we mostly deal with people like husband and wife, a young family, and, you know, it's very difficult. I have a question. Human trafficking and money laundering. Like if someone's trafficking people in Africa or in Asia, they try and launder the money here in Canada, or is the money laundered here from activities here?
Well, often these things are done, and they're done in various different ways and formats. But one of the things that's emerging now as a way that dirty money is laundered is through trade-related money laundering. And that's usually done through over or under invoicing. So you might have a commercial transaction where the invoice is significantly overstated. And so the excess is deposited into some account here in Canada. Yeah, it's done in so many different various ways that frankly, I'm not an expert on the mechanisms, but it's done in ways that are quite successful in hiding the origin of the money. And in some cases, of course, they're caught. There was a report that came out from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. Now it's a few years old, but it says that very little of the dirty money is actually picked up by the financial intelligence units. And there was an article recently in The Economist which says we're losing the war against money laundering. And there's a group in Washington, D.C. called Global Financial Integrity, and they looked at FinCEN. FinCEN is the U.S. anti-money laundering unit, and it's based in the U.S. Department of the Treasury. And basically, the Global Financial Integrity came out and they say, what we need is a Manhattan Project. We need to totally rethink what's being done to fight money laundering. It gets so technical and so cumbersome. Compliance costs are significant. Government costs are significant. And they're talking about better use of data, using artificial intelligence, things like blockchain technology for financial institutions. So I think we've got to sort of step back a bit and look at what we're doing. I think my presentation hopefully conveyed the fact that there's a lot of things that even by conventional norms, we could be doing a heck of a lot better. But even given that, there's ways in which technology could be used in more advantageous ways.
I've got a question here, and we're speaking a lot today on Vancouver and Hong Kong and China. But what about sources like Russia, the Middle East, and other areas? There must be a bit of concern there too, no?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. My presentation was designed primarily initially for to deal with some of the work I did in British Columbia. But and there, if you're looking at the geopolitics with Asia, you know, I'm not suggesting we pick on China or anything. It just happens that there's a lot of money flowing back and forth between China and Asia and Vancouver because of the geopolitics. But no, dirty money. Russia is right up there with the dirty money. In fact, we had a big case a number of years ago with Russian kleptocrats laundering money in a Toronto-based company or a Toronto-listed company. So no, it's the Balkans, Latin America, former Soviet bloc countries. No, I mean the problem is it's a clandestine activity. So people have ways and methodologies of trying to estimate how much is being laundered, but it's very much a guessing game to some extent. I mean, educated guessing, but it's hard to know exactly how much is involved and exactly where it's all coming from.
Wow, I suspect we could probably ask you questions all afternoon long. This is quite a interesting topic, and like Laurie in the messages here says, money laundering has no borders. I guess the same thing goes for crime, like money laundering and even counterfeit, you know, the fake Louis Vuittons and Gucci stuff, all that money gets laundered too.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's one thing that we should say as well. I should say about the increase in organized criminality, and how, you know, the problem is too that money laundering is seen as, to some extent, as a victimless crime, which it isn't. And if you look at economic crimes, they tend to be looked upon that way. But we do know better than that. But if you look at, for example, counterfeit goods, I did some work on that with the Canadian Standards Association, which used to be in my riding, and a lot of not only the counterfeit intellectual properties that relate to, let's say, you know, music and stuff like that, but counterfeit goods that are real threats to human health and safety. And when I was in Europe, there was a really good briefing, and the Europeans estimated that 50%, not to again pick on China, but 50% of the counterfeit goods were coming into the European Union from China. And of course, you get them into one country in Europe, it can spread around pretty quickly. And one of the reasons for that is that China, again, not to pick on China, but it's a very corrupt country. Something like 15% of their economy is seen to be corrupt. And so a lot of these factories producing counterfeit goods, you know, the officials are paid off, and they know full well that the goods are counterfeit. I worked on that issue a lot. We had to stiffen things up at the border with the Canada Border Services Agency, giving them more of a mandate in terms of intellectual property. But yeah, the list is pretty exhaustive, and it's not shrinking, unfortunately.
Well, as I said, we could talk about this all day long. I see some of the other questions. They're sort of, I think you've answered pretty much some way or other most of the questions. I want to thank you so much for speaking to us today, Roy. Good to have you back home at the Rotary Club of Toronto. And a donation has been made in your honor to Water First Canada, the leading charitable organization working with First Nations communities to resolve local water challenges through education, training, and meaningful collaboration.
Oh, thank you very much.
Since 2009, Water First has partnered with over 40 Indigenous communities in Ontario, Quebec, and Labrador on a variety of education and training projects focusing on drinking and environmental water. This donation is made in partnership with the Rotary Club of Toronto's Indigenous Service Committee. Thank you. Next Friday, April 23rd, our guest speaker will be Rafi Sarkisian, principal of the ARS Armenian Private School, and his topic will be the legacy of the Armenian genocide and Canada's response. Please feel free to invite guests and share the links to connect. However, have them contact the office in order to be admitted to the meeting. Well, we're almost done today. I think we have a slightly sunny weekend. Things are a little tense out there. We can't be lax. We got to be really pull up our socks and stay home and do as little as possible. Even my beloved Grey Bruce has been hit hard this week. So I hope everyone stays safe, does everything they can, and check in on people, even if you have to do it by phone or email. And have a good weekend. And thank you for attending. The meeting is adjourned.